Everything looks different now.
Hey guys, welcome back. Now, we're going to be discussing the controversy, Milogate, right? What happened with Milo Yiannopoulos. I'm not going to drag this through the mud. I suggest that before you watch this video, go and watch the interview that he did, where he discussed Father Michael, giving head, very young boys, and all those things. Because we can't do everything in one video, or the video is going to be like an hour long, considering that you'd have to watch. Actually, it's like a 2-hour podcast that he did. Go and watch that, then come back and watch this video. What I want to do here is explain a few things that I have seen, or that I have not seen, rather, in other shows. Now, the first that I'm going to say is how utterly disgusted I am with the right now. The right claims to be these compassionate conservatives, these Judeo-Christians with the biggest heart, but they're ready to lynch anyone at a heartbeat. There was a guy, I don't know his name, glasses, thin guy, unlike me, and he works for AMT or something like that, and he was yelling at the top of his lungs that Milo has set the conservative movement back 10 years, and now we're all associated with pedophiles, and he was screaming and saying a lot of disgusting things, and I thought to myself, what a sad man, full of hatred. What I look at when I see Milo is I see a man who was abused as a boy. If you've never been sexually abused, I have not. My mother was sexually abused as a child. It tore her to pieces, and she was never the same. I'm not going to mention, there are other members of my family, but because they may not want me to mention it, I'm not going to mention not even if they're male or female or their relation to me. But I will say that there have been other members of my family that have been sexually abused. Again, out of respect, I will not mention who they are. I will say I myself have never been sexually abused, but I have known people intimately that have been sexually abused. Intimately, not sexually, but I mean that they are blood relatives of mine. And in fact, I know the abuser in many cases. I've met the abuser in many cases, and they did not go to jail because nobody reported it. And it's a sick and disgusting thing that goes on. But what I saw was a man who has turned pain and hatred into something positive. And I'm going to talk in the end a lot more about that. But one thing I didn't see is people properly define pedophilia. They're throwing it out saying that, he's advocating pedophilia and all these things. And there was another man who worked for Breitbart. I forgot his name. He's an editor at Breitbart. And he was saying how it was a sad day for the conservative movement because nobody's talking about it now. He was disgusted because something happened with Ted Nugent, and how Ted Nugent was 30 and he adopted a 17-year-old or something like that so they could have sexual relations. And he was calling that pedophilia. It's not pedophilia. So I thought I'd clarify this because I'm a doctor. And we're going to go. First, we're going to use a standard dictionary. Of course, I have the American Heritage Dictionary. Please don't judge me. I have other dictionaries. It's just my favorite one. But it really doesn't matter because this is a generic dictionary. And then we're going to go, because in this case we need to the DSM-5. And I'm going to read to you the exact definition of what is pedophilia, so that we can ask ourselves, was Milo advocating pedophilia? Yes or no? Was he talking about pedophilia? Yes or no? So we're going to go here, and in the Standard Dictionary, pedophilia, the act or fantasy on the part of an adult of engaging in sexual activity with a child. Again, act or fantasy. It's very important. But here's the problem with this. Child. The term child. Child technically is anyone that is below the age of 12. If that's a definition you want to use, because I'm 36, but I'm still my father's child. And no, my wife does not sexually abuse me. So the term child in this case, we can't use this dictionary. this dictionary becomes useless when it comes to medical things, just like when it comes to science or engineering or psychology or whatnot. Anything highly specialized, the standard dictionary is just not going to cut it. So we're going to go to the DSM-5. For those of you who want to know, page 697 is what we're going to look at on pedophilic disorders 302.2 diagnostic criteria. So if you want to get your DSM-5 or you want to Google this, again, is page 697, pedophilic disorders 302.2 diagnostic criteria. Let's look at exactly what is pedophilia as is currently defined in the DSM-5. One little tiny caveat. Not every doctor, not every psychiatrist agrees with the DSM-5. These are guidelines. Guidelines. These are not set in stone. Right? It's not like genetics where we know a lot. Right? It's not like things like liver disease or heart disease or brain tumors where we know exactly and the parameters are well defined. These are general guidelines because when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to mental anything, there's a lot we don't really know. In fact, over 97% of the brain, we have no idea what it does. All right, so let's continue. But we still, one thing, we do still have to follow the guidelines because although there's a lot we don't know, this is the best that we have. And even though it may not be perfect, it's still better than nothing. So let's adhere to these guidelines for the time being. Pedophilic disorders 302.2 diagnostic criteria A. Over a period of at least 6 months, recurrent intense sexually arousing fantasies, sexual urges or behaviors involving sexual activity with a prepubescent child or children, generally age 13 or younger, generally because puberty is a range, right? It's not a specific day that you get you go through puberty. It's a process. So again, Milo was perfectly correct when he defined pedophilia. He defined pedophilia perfectly fine. It has to be a prepubescent child. So if you have sex with a 14-year-old, that's not pedophilia. I'm sorry, it's not pedophilia. I didn't say it's right, despite the smile on my face, because I'm laughing. I didn't say it was right. I'm not advocating it, right? You sleep with my 14-year-old daughter, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. But you're not a pedophile. You're sick, but you're not a pedophile. You know what you are? Statutory rape. That's it. It's rape. It's rape of a minor. It gets into really, really murky waters when you get up to 16 and 17 years old. So the second, B, the individual has acted on these sexual urges or the sexual urges or fantasies cause marked distress or interpersonal difficulty. In other words, inability to properly express sexual desires for a prepubescent child or prepubescent human, I guess, can cause interpersonal distress or marked distress. In other words, me so sad me can't do little baby. By the way, not me personally, just to clarify that. The individual is at least age 16 and at least 5 years older than the child or children in criterion A. The 15-year-old has sex with a 14-year-old. Has sex with an 11-year-old. That's not rape. That's not pedophilia. I know it's weird, but it's not. According to the guidelines, you have to be 5 years older and more than 16 years old. At least 16 years old. So let's say that you're 16 and you have sex with an 11-year-old. That's pedophilia. That's really murky, isn't it? It's a little murky because when you're 16, your hormones are raging and some people can control them better than others. I don't know. It says, note, do not include an individual in late adolescence involving in an ongoing sexual relationship with a 12 or 13-year-old. Okay. Okay, so in other words, Milo was perfectly correct in what he said. The next part that we're going to talk about is prevalence. For those of you who don't know what prevalence is, and I'm not being condescending here, I'm not talking down to you, right? So condescension means what I'm doing is trying to inform and educate because not everybody's a medical professional. Prevalence means what percentage of the population has this, right? So if you say the prevalence of AIDS, 5 or 10% out of the population, not 5 or 10. I forgot the prevalence for AIDS. But here we go. Prevalence. The population prevalence of pedophiliac disorder is unknown. And yet they give a number. But we can sort of kind of guess it. And the reason why it's unknown is because many go unreported. My mother's went unreported. At least 2 or 3 other members in my families went unreported at that time. So we don't have numbers for that. But what we do have are rough numbers of the ones that are reported. The highest possible prevalence for pedophiliac disorders in the male population is 3 to 5%. About 3 to 5%. I'm gonna say that it's probably more than 5%. In my personal experience, from what I have seen, it's probably closer to 10%. That's gonna scare the crap out of you, and it should. It should if you're a father. It should if you're a mother. Another thing is that you may say, well, wait a minute, why male population? Why not female? Well, because pedophiles are predominantly male. No, there are female pedophiles, that's true. But for the most part, they tend to be male. Just like serial killers, right? Majority tend to be male. So the other thing I want to discuss is the risk factors and prognostic factors. Again, risk and prognostic factors are how likely is it that a person is to develop this and under what conditions, right? So one is temperamental. There are 3: temperamental, environmental, and genetic and physiological. So we'll go temperamental first. There appears to be an interaction between pedophilia and anti-society, such that males with both transit are more likely to act out sexually with children. Thus, antisocial personality disorder may be considered a risk factor for pedophiliac disorder in males with pedophilia. This is actually makes sense if you understand that people who are severe introverts and they're antisocial will not be able to act out their sexual necessities normally. In other words, they're not going to find a girlfriend. They're not going to be able to. They're going to turn to porn a lot. They're going to turn to self-gratification, masturbation. But they're not going to be able to express that sexual energy, and that can, in some cases, lead towards pedophilia if there's already a tendency towards pedophilia. In other words, more likely if there's a fantasy, it will turn into reality. Environmental. Adults, okay, this is very important. And this is where I'm not saying that Milo is a pedophile, but this is, and by the way, I'm saying Milo is not a pedophile, but this is where we can kind of sort of begin to understand where his comments were coming from. Environmental. Adult males with pedophilia often report that they were sexually abused as children. It is unclear, however, whether this correlation reflects the causal influence of childhood sexual abuse on adult pedophilia. Homosexual boys that were sexually abused tend to sexually abuse, which is why when Milo was talking about these sex parties with very young boys, that makes a lot of sense. That makes perfect sense. Not sensing that I agree with it from a scientific or anthropological point of view or psychological point of view or psychiatric point of view, whichever you want to take it, it makes a lot of sense that you would have a group of males that were abused continue or propagate the abuse, particularly in the homosexual community. Especially they come from broken homes and they have other risk factors. So that makes a lot of sense. The other is genetic and physiological. Since pedophilia is a necessary condition for pedophilic disorder, any factor that increases the probability of pedophilia also increases the risk of pedophiliac disorder. There is some evidence that neurodevelopmental perturbation in utero increases the probability of development in of a pedophilic orientation. Let me translate this for you. Blah, blah, blah. We think maybe something happens in the fetus, but we have no evidence, and thus I have no idea why they put it in here. But the reason I think they put it in here is because genetics may always play a role in anything. Well, it plays a role because it made us. Without genes, we wouldn't be here. I think that the genetics and part is a little BSy in my opinion. Last, in the, I think it was Jeff Rogan or the Rogan interview, Milo made a comment saying, "Well, you've never seen a 13-year-old girl and thought she was hot," and the host defended himself. "No, I never have." You know what? I call bullshit on that. I call bullshit. And this is the reason why I call bullshit. First, well, two reasons. First, some females develop and look far older. And if you're 24 or 25 and you look at a girl and she looks like she's 18, but she's really 13, it happens. It's rare, but it does. And she looks fine. But she turns out to be dumb as a rock because when you talk to her, she doesn't know anything. But, well, like 18-year-olds know anything either. But anyway, so I call bullshit on that because it does happen. And people don't want to admit it because he runs a radio show and he's conservative. And he'd suffer the same fate that Milo is suffering right now. So I call bullshit on that. But here's the second and most important reason why I call bullshit is alcohol and substance abuse disorder. The distinguishing effects of intoxication may also increase the likelihood that a person who is primarily attracted to a mature physique will sexually approach a child. If you're drunk, you may think a child is attractive. It's the same idea that if you're drunk, ugly women appear beautiful. That's true. Now, we're not saying a child like, oh my God, you're going to say like, ooh, look at that 6-year-old girl. Man, that Barbie looks good. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that it is quite possible that you're drunk and a girl who's 13 maybe looks like she's 16. You're 25. You look over and you're already hammered and the room is spinning a little bit and you say, wow, no, she looks good. And it happens all the time. But we don't want to talk about it because it's not proper, right? Look, I suggest you pick up your, I don't suggest you pick up the DSM-5. This is worthless if you're not a doctor. But if you want to do good research and understand things, this is a dictionary. Well, it's not really a dictionary, right? But this is something that you should have. For those of you, again, who don't know, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5, DSM-5. Pick this thing up. And of course, get yourself several dictionaries because they do the mind good. Now on to my analysis. When I heard, and I went back and I watched the entire interview a few times, and I watched both the interviews that were in question. Yes, first when he said the thing about Father Michael and giving head, and he had, if it wasn't for Father Michael, he would have never learned to give good head. I laughed. I thought that was funny. I understand that some of you may be very conservative and say, oh my God, that's disgusting. But he was making a joke, right? He was taking a pain that he has and turning it into comedy, which a lot of comedians do, by the way. A lot. They go into drugs. A lot of comedians were abused as a child, usually sexually. We see this again and again. They come from broken homes, divorced parents, or single parents. This is not uncommon. But one of the reasons why I'm so angry at the left is failure to see this for what it is. Milo is joking. Yeah, they're jokes that you don't like. Okay, fine. Don't invite him to CPAC. I honestly don't know why you guys invited him in the first place, but okay, fine. There were others that you could have invited. But don't criticize him and call him a pedophile and all these things because it's not true. I see him as a person who has suffered a great deal and has done amazing. He has surpassed this where most would have either committed suicide, become pedophiles, or just led miserable lives. Milo has risen above that. And the other thing is that people were criticizing him when he went on Bill Maher's show and he had his pearls on and he was acting very gay. This was a role. This was an act. And when he went to do his apology, he was very conservative and because he's playing to different audiences. Everybody does it. I don't know why they're criticizing him. Everybody does it. So when he went on Bill Maher's show and he said, I'm not a conservative, he's not. Oh, why do you guys think he's a conservative? He is a conservative today. Let me explain this to you, right? I was not a conservative before. I was moderate. But the left moved so far off the reservation that now I'm considered alt-right. The founding fathers were classical liberals. They were renegades. They were rebels in a very literal sense. They were the true liberals, the true progressives. Today, they would be considered batshit crazy alt-right. Let that sink in. What's happened to our country, what's happened to the left and the right. What's happened to Milo is political assassination. That's it. It's just political assassination. They found him a threat. Both the left and the right found him a threat. But Milo's not going anywhere. Many people like myself will support him. He will establish his own news channel or his news network or whatever it is, his platform. I will support it, and I know many, many other people that will. The conservative movement has to grow, and we cannot grow by pushing people away, especially when they weren't in the wrong. We should be compassionate. We should extend our hand and say, hey, you know what? This umbrella, this camp is big enough to include many different types of conservatives. The gay conservative should be included. The sexually abused conservative should be understood. I ask that conservatives look in their hearts, look in their minds, and ask themselves, really? Because you're kind of being a bit of a dick right now to Milo. And it's not fair. That man has brought conservatism to the mainstream, to many, many people in Generation Z and the millennial generation that would have otherwise never heard our message. We should be thankful to Milo. We shouldn't criticize. He was wrong in what he said, and he apologized for it. Okay. So what? You haven't said things that you don't regret? I've said a lot of things I regret over the years. But what do we do as an adult? We admit we were wrong. We apologize. And we move on, because what else can we do? He made a mistake. One thing that I will say. In no way am I justifying pedophilia. And to Milo, you're never going to watch this, but if you're watching, as painful as it may be, it was pointed out by, I think, Stephan Molyneux, that if you know, and this was at the end of his video, and I'll link his video below because I thought it was great. If you know of pedophile rings or sex parties where 13-year-old boys or younger are having sex with older men, it's not just your legal, forget legal, it's your moral obligation to make sure that these boys do not go through what you went through what my mother went through, and other members of my family. Please, speak out against this. Point it out, as painful as it may be. That priest that did that to you, and that other man that did that to you, you should point this out. It's not okay, and it will never be okay. With that said, I don't think you were wrong in what you said or how you said it. To everybody else, get a sense of humor. It's okay to joke about things. Even things that are disturbing, right? Not everything is for everybody. I look at the left and some of the jokes they tell, and I don't get them. I don't. I mean, I understand the punchline. I just don't think it's funny. So with that said, to everybody else on the right, cut it out. All right, we're in a war, for an existential war, to save our country from the left. This is exactly what they want. They want us to tear each other apart. Don't fall for it. We need to have each other's backs. That doesn't mean blindly accept it, by the way. That doesn't mean sacrifice your morals or your values or your ethics. It just means it's okay to say, hey, I don't like that. I disagree with you. I think that's disgusting. Then if they apologize, they apologize. If not, we move on, because we're all adults and we're all in this together. Thank you very much. Do take the time out to go to the DSM-5. There's a lot more I didn't read. It's a little technical, but take the time out. And if you don't want to pick up the DSM-5, you can Google it. It's free. Just Google pedophilia DSM-5, and it'll come up. So anyway, thank you very much for this. I appreciate you guys watching this. Do spread this video. A like below would be greatly appreciated. Oh, it's not necessary. If you want to be alerted to any time that I make another video or an analysis, again, I do medical analysis. I do analysis where I'll take the actual book, I'll read it to you. I will take the reference books. I have a lot of them, and I will tell you where to get them, where to look them up, so that you don't have to believe me. You don't have to trust me. Though I do appreciate you listening to me, but you can go check for yourself and make up your own mind, right? So this is the only thing that we can offer each other, is absolute truth. And that's all that I want. So please do like this video. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.